Alright, so this is about the first half of question number 10, and we're starting with adding functions. And whenever we add functions together, it is just essentially combining like terms. So a little bit of notation. So let's say that I have two functions. F of x equals 4x to the third minus 2x plus 7. And let's say I have g of x equals 3x squared minus 5x plus 4. So my notation, f of x plus g of x, this is one way you could see it written. I'm just adding f of x plus g of x. You could also see it written as f plus g of x. And it's very important. This x right here, this is just part of my function notation, right? F of x, g of x, so f plus g of x. You are not multiplying by this x, all right? Good way to get you no points is if you multiply this. Do not multiply by this x value. It is simply just part of my notation, okay? So when we add the two functions together, it does make some new function. I'm going to call it h, but you could call it anything you wanted, but it does form a new function. So let's look at what f plus g of x looks like. So I want to add f plus g, so I'm going to write down f, 4x cubed minus 2x plus 7, and I want to add g of x, so 3x squared minus 5x plus 4, adding my two functions together. And now it comes down to just combining my like terms. So I have 4x cubed. Looking through all my other terms, I don't have anything else that has an x cubed, so I'll just simply write 4x cubed down. Now I'm going to go through. I have an x squared. It's the only term that has an x squared. So again, I'll just write it down, and it is positive. So I have plus 3x squared. So I have x cubed, x squared. So now I'm looking for plain x's. I have negative 2x minus 5x. So negative 2x minus 5x gives me negative 7x. And last, my plain numbers. I have a positive 7. I have a positive 4. Gives me a positive 11. And now I've added my two functions together. That's it. And just like when we're adding plain constants, numbers together, when we're adding, order does not matter, right? 2 plus 3 gives me what? 5, right? It's not a trick question at all. 2 plus 3 gives me 5. And what is 3 plus 2? It's 5, right? Same thing with adding functions together. The order does not matter. So f plus g of x is the same thing as g plus f of x. The order does not matter. And we've looked at evaluating functions at a certain point. So I could look at evaluating the sum of two functions together, and it works exactly the same way as I'm evaluating just a single function at a certain point. So let's say I wanted to know what is f plus g of 2. F plus g of 2. Again, I am not multiplying by 2. This is the number that gets plugged in to my function. So do not multiply. Plug it in, right? So we've already added f plus g together. The 2 tells me to plug the 2 in for x. So I'm going to take the function that I added together, and I'm going to plug 2 in for x. So I'll have 4 times 2 cubed plus 3 times 2 squared minus 7 times 2 plus 11. Notice that the number I plugged in is in parentheses. This will help me to be able to do my order of operations properly. All right. From here, simplifying, like I said, it is just order of operations. You need to be sure that you follow the order of operations, otherwise you will mess up the arithmetic. So starting with P stands for parentheses. And it means that I'm looking inside my parentheses to see if I have any operations that I can do. Inside my parentheses is just a 2, so there's no addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, nothing like that, so I have nothing to do inside of my parentheses. The next thing is exponents. I do have exponents, so I want to do those first. 2 to the third power, remember that means 2 times 2 times 2, which is, it is 8. So I'm going to have 4 times 8 plus, I have 2 squared, which means 2 times 2, 2 times itself. So I'll have 3 times 4 minus 7 times 2 plus 11. So I've done all of my exponents. Next I have multiplication. So just going through and multiplying, 4 times 8 gives me 32, plus 3 times 4 gives me 12. Negative 7 times 2 gives me negative 14, plus 11. So I've done all the multiplication. I don't have any division in my problem, so I can cancel that out. Once I get down to addition and subtraction, I can do them at the same time as long as I start at the left, work my way to the right. All right, so 32 plus 12 gives me 44. Then I have minus 14 plus 11. So again, starting at the left, working my way to the right. 44 minus 14 gives me 30 plus 11. So finally, 30 plus 11 gives me 41. Okay, so if I have a number inside the parentheses, that means whatever I got when I added the two functions together, I just want to plug that number in and see what I get. Okay. Questions about adding functions together? None thus far? All right. Okay, so we can add functions together. We can also subtract functions. And subtracting functions works essentially the same exact way as adding functions, but now we have a minus sign. Remember, subtraction, minus signs kind of change the game a little bit. We've got to be careful with our signs. So let's get a couple of functions going real quick. Let's say I have 2x squared minus 4x plus 2, and g of x equals negative 7x minus 5. So I have my two functions. So again, a little bit of notation. So f of x minus g of x is the same as writing f minus g of x. Again, this x and these x's are just part of the notation, part of my function notation. I am not multiplying anything by x. I'm simply subtracting some like terms, right? Something to note, when we're subtracting, does order matter? Same thing when you're dealing with regular numbers. Does order matter when you subtract? Yes, right? What is 4 minus 1? It is 3. What is 1 minus 4? Negative 3, right? That was not a trick question. Negative 3. So you do get different answers depending on the order. So f of x minus g of x is the same as f minus g of x. Then we could also have g of x minus f of x, which is just the reverse order, right? This is g minus f of x, and they will give you different answers, so be careful of the order. So let's do f of x minus g of x. So I want to do f of x minus g of x. Remember, that's the same thing as f minus g of x. I am not multiplying by this x, it's just part of my notation. And so I want to do f, so write down all of f, 2x squared minus 4x plus 2, minus, I'm subtracting now, so f of x, minus all of g of x, right? I want to subtract this whole thing off. So I'm going to stick g of x inside of parentheses. So I know I am subtracting this whole thing. Now, an easy way to get rid of those parentheses, if you look at this minus as a negative 1. If I distribute the negative 1, I can get rid of my parentheses and then just combine like terms like we did when we were adding. By multiplying by this negative 1, I'm essentially just changing all of the signs inside the parentheses. F will stay the same. So I'll have 2x squared minus 4x plus 2. That does not change. And then negative 1 times negative 7x gives me positive 7x. And negative 1 times negative 5 gives me positive 5. Okay. And so now I can just combine like terms, just like we did when we were adding the functions together. So I'll start by finding my highest power, and it's x squared. 2x squared is the only term with x squared, so I'll just write it down, 2x squared. Then I'll have my x's, so I have negative 4x plus 7x. Negative 4x plus 7x gives me positive 3x. And last, I have my constants, so positive 2 plus 5 gives me positive 7. There we go. I have subtracted my two functions. Just like when we're adding functions, I can evaluate the difference of two functions at a certain point. So let's say I want to find g minus f of negative 1. What is g minus f of negative 1? So I want to subtract my two functions first. So first I'm going to find g minus f of x. So I'm going to take g, notice the order, I want to do g minus all of f. So I'm going to put f in parentheses, 2x squared minus 4x plus 2. And I want to get rid of those parentheses, so I'm going to distribute this negative 1. So I'll get negative 7x minus 5. Distributing my negative 1 gives me negative 2x squared plus 4x minus 2. Now I can combine my like terms. Again, I'm going to go and I'm going to look for the highest power. In this case, it's the x squared, so I have negative 2x squared. It is the only term that has x squared, so I'll just write it down, negative 2x squared. And then my x's, I have negative 7x plus 4x, so I get negative 3x. And then my plain numbers, my constants, I have negative 5 minus 2, which gives me negative 7. So now that I've subtracted my two functions, I can go back and I can plug in this negative 1. So g minus f of negative 1 equals negative 2 times negative 1 squared minus 3 times negative 1 minus 7. Again, this is just arithmetic, so I'm going to use order of operations to simplify. I'm going to write it down so I know I don't miss anything. Starting with p, my parentheses, looking inside my parentheses, I just have a -1. So I don't have any operations that I can do with that. So I'm done with parentheses. Exponents, I do have a square. -1 squared, or squaring something, squaring a value means to multiply it by itself. -1 times -1 is +1. So I get -2 times +1 minus 3 times -1 minus 7. Done with my exponents. Then multiplication. I have -2 times 1, which gives me -2. -3 times -1, negative times a negative gives me a positive. And then my minus 7. So I'm done with multiplication. Looking through my problem, I don't have any division. So now I'm down to addition and subtraction. Again, I can do them at the same time as long as I go from left to right. So -2 plus 3 gives me +1 minus 7. 1 minus 7 gives me -6. There's my answer. Okay? Good?